In 1994, a German archaeologist named Klaus Schmidt was wandering through the hills of southeastern Turkey looking at a site that other researchers had already dismissed. A survey team from the University of Chicago had come through decades earlier, noticed some broken limestone on a hillside, assumed it was nothing more than a medieval cemetery, and moved on. Schmidt saw something different. He noticed that the fragments of stone scattered across that hillside were not random. They were worked, shaped by human hands, and they were old, incredibly old. What he uncovered beneath that hill would force us to rethink one of the most basic assumptions about human civilization. The idea that farming came first and then people built monuments, that you needed agriculture, surplus food, and settled villages before anyone would bother carving massive stone pillars and arranging them in circles. Göbekli Tepe shattered that idea. Beneath the dirt lay a complex of enormous stone enclosures, ringed with T-shaped pillars standing up to 18 feet tall and weighing as much as 10 tons. Some were carved with intricate reliefs of animals: foxes, vultures, scorpions, snakes, wild boar, not domesticated animals, wild ones, dangerous ones. And here is the part that stunned everyone. Radiocarbon dating placed the oldest structures at roughly 9600 BCE, that is nearly 12,000 years ago. To put that into perspective, Göbekli Tepe was already ancient by the time Stonehenge was built. It predates the oldest known cities by thousands of years. It predates pottery. It even predates agriculture itself, or at least what we thought we knew about agriculture's timeline. The people who built this place were hunter-gatherers. They had no permanent settlements, no granaries, no domesticated crops, and yet they organized the labor of hundreds, possibly thousands of people to quarry, transport, and erect these massive pillars. They carved artwork that suggests a complex symbolic world, maybe even something we could call religion. For more than a century, archaeologists had told a neat story. Humans settled down, started farming, built villages, then eventually got around to building temples and monuments. Göbekli Tepe flipped that story on its head. It suggested that maybe the desire to gather, to worship, to create something monumental together is what drove people to settle down in the first place. Maybe the temple came before the farm. That one hillside in Turkey didn't just add a footnote to human history, it rearranged the chapters. But Göbekli Tepe was not the only discovery that forced a complete rewrite. Sometimes the discovery that changes everything fits in the palm of your hand. In 2008, scientists working in Denisova Cave, a small limestone cavern tucked into the Altai Mountains of Siberia, found a tiny fragment of a finger bone. It belonged to a young girl, maybe 5 or 6 years old, who had lived roughly 40,000 years ago. The bone itself was unremarkable, small, broken, almost easy to overlook. But when researchers at the Max Planck Institute in Leipzig extracted DNA from that fragment, what they found rewrote our understanding of who we are as a species. The DNA did not match Homo sapiens. It did not match Neanderthals either. It belonged to an entirely unknown group of ancient humans that no one had ever identified before. A whole branch of the human family tree hiding in plain sight. They called them Denisovans after the cave where the bone was found. And then the picture got even stranger. When scientists compared Denisovan DNA to the genomes of living people, they found traces of it. Not everywhere, but in specific populations. People in Melanesia, Aboriginal Australians, and some Southeast Asian groups carry significant percentages of Denisovan DNA. In some cases, as much as 5 or 6% of their genome traces back to these mysterious relatives. That means Denisovans did not just exist alongside our ancestors. They met them, they had children together, and those genetic contributions survive in billions of people alive today. From a single broken finger bone, smaller than a coin, an entire species emerged into the historical record. We went from having no idea they existed to understanding that their DNA runs through modern human populations across half the planet. Before that bone was found, the story of human evolution had 2 main characters in the late Pleistocene: us and the Neanderthals. After that bone, the cast got a lot more crowded. And speaking of crowded, the next discovery introduced a character so unexpected that it sparked one of the fiercest debates in paleoanthropology. In 2003, a team of Australian and Indonesian archaeologists were excavating a cave called Liang Bua on the island of Flores in Indonesia. Deep in the cave sediments, they found a skeleton, a nearly complete one, which is rare enough to be exciting all on its own. But this skeleton was strange. It stood only about 3.5 feet tall. Its brain was roughly the size of a chimpanzee's. Its feet were long and flat, almost comically oversized for its body, and its wrist bones looked more like those of an Australopithecine, a group of human ancestors that was supposed to have gone extinct over 1 million years ago. But here is the part that made jaws drop around the world. The remains were dated to only about 60,000 years ago, with some associated stone tools dated even more recently, possibly as late as 50,000 years ago. That means this tiny human was alive at the same time as us. Modern Homo sapiens were already painting cave walls and crossing oceans, while this small-brained, hobbit-sized species was still living in a cave on a remote Indonesian island. They named it Homo floresiensis. The press immediately nicknamed it the Hobbit. The announcement hit the scientific community like a thunderclap. Some researchers refused to believe it was a separate species at all. They argued it must be a modern human with a pathological condition, maybe microcephaly or some form of dwarfism. The debate was vicious for years. Papers were published, accusations were made. At one point, the original bones were taken from the discovery team by a senior Indonesian scientist who disagreed with the interpretation, and some of them were damaged before being returned. But as more remains were found and as more detailed analyses were completed, the evidence piled up. This was not a sick modern human. The skeletal features were too consistent, too systematic, too unlike anything pathology could explain. Homo floresiensis was its own species, a tiny, small-brained human that survived on an isolated island for hundreds of thousands of years, long after its relatives on the mainland had vanished. It forced a fundamental question. If a human species with a brain this small could make stone tools, hunt cooperatively, and survive for that long, then what exactly is the relationship between brain size and intelligence? What else might we be wrong about? The Hobbit didn't just add a page to the textbook, it made us question whether we'd been reading the textbook correctly all along. Now, if Homo floresiensis challenged what we thought we knew about the brain, the next discovery challenged what we thought we knew about the mind, specifically the minds of people we had dismissed as primitive for over a century. In December 1994, 3 cave explorers in southern France squeezed through a narrow passage in a cliff face near the Ardèche River and dropped into a vast underground chamber. What they found inside stopped them in their tracks. Covering the walls were hundreds of paintings: lions, rhinoceroses, mammoths, horses, bison, bears. Some were drawn in charcoal, others in red ochre. Many were not just outlines but fully shaded, with careful attention to muscle structure and movement. Some animals appeared to be running. Others were drawn with multiple legs, as if the artist was trying to capture motion, almost like an ancient attempt at animation. This was the Chauvet Cave, and it would soon be recognized as one of the most significant archaeological discoveries of the 20th century. When researchers dated the paintings, the results were almost hard to believe. The oldest images in Chauvet were roughly 36,000 years old. Some estimates pushed them closer to 37,000. That made them nearly twice as old as the famous paintings at Lascaux, which had been considered the gold standard of prehistoric art for decades. But the age was only part of the shock. What really stunned researchers was the sophistication. These were not crude scratches or simple handprints. The artists at Chauvet understood perspective. They used shading to create depth. They even took advantage of the natural contours of the cave walls to give their animals a three-dimensional quality, so that by firelight the figures would seem to shift and breathe. Before Chauvet, many scholars assumed that art had evolved gradually. Simple figures first, then slowly, over thousands of years, increasing complexity and skill. Chauvet destroyed that assumption. Here was art of breathtaking quality appearing right at the beginning of the European artistic record, fully formed, with no slow progression leading up to it. It suggested that the capacity for this kind of expression did not develop incrementally. It was already there. The cognitive architecture for symbolic thinking, for storytelling, for seeing the world and wanting to represent it, all of that was present in our ancestors far earlier than anyone had assumed. Chauvet did not just push back the timeline of art, it forced us to reconsider the inner lives of people who lived 36,000 years ago. These were not grunting cave dwellers stumbling toward culture. They were artists. They saw beauty in the world around them, and they had the skill to capture it on stone in ways that still take your breath away today. And that brings us to the fifth discovery, one that did not emerge from a cave or a remote island, but from the bottom of the sea. In 1900, a group of Greek sponge divers were working off the coast of a small island called Antikythera, between Crete and the Greek mainland. Diving for sponges in deep water, one of them surfaced in a panic, babbling about a heap of dead bodies on the ocean floor. What he had actually found was the wreck of an ancient Roman cargo ship loaded with bronze and marble statues corroded by centuries of salt water. Among the statues and pottery, salvage divers recovered a lump of corroded bronze about the size of a shoebox. It was so encrusted and damaged that nobody paid much attention to it at first. It sat in a museum storage room for months before someone noticed that the corrosion had cracked apart in places, revealing something no one expected: gears, tiny, precisely cut bronze gears. Over the following decades, researchers slowly pieced together what this thing was. It is now known as the Antikythera mechanism, and it is the oldest known analog computer in the world. The device was built around 100 BCE, possibly earlier. It contained at least 30 interlocking bronze gears, meticulously crafted, that could track the movements of the sun, the moon, and the 5 planets visible to the naked eye. It predicted eclipses. It tracked the cycles of the Olympic Games. It modeled the irregular orbit of the moon using a sophisticated gear arrangement that wouldn't be reinvented for another 1,500 years. Let that sit for a moment. More than 2,000 years ago, someone built a mechanical device so complex, so precisely engineered, that nothing comparable would appear again until the astronomical clocks of medieval Europe. And we only know about it because a boatload of looted art happened to sink in the right spot for sponge divers to stumble across it 2 millennia later. The Antikythera mechanism obliterated the old assumption that ancient Greeks were brilliant philosophers but mediocre engineers. It proved they had the ability to translate their astronomical knowledge into intricate mechanical form. And it raises a haunting question. If this one device survived by pure accident, what else was built that we will never know about? How many ancient machines rusted away, were melted down for scrap, or simply rotted into nothing because no shipwreck preserved them? Every one of these 5 discoveries shares something in common. They did not gently update our understanding. They ambushed it. A hillside in Turkey that upended the story of civilization. A finger bone in Siberia that revealed an unknown species. A tiny skeleton on an Indonesian island that defied everything we thought about brains and intelligence. Cave paintings in France that proved ancient humans had the same creative fire we do. And a corroded lump of bronze from the bottom of the Mediterranean that showed us ancient engineering we never imagined possible. Each one arrived without warning. Each one forced researchers to tear up theories they had held for decades and start again from scratch. And each one carries the same quiet implication. If we were this wrong about these things, what else are we wrong about? What is still buried out there, waiting under some hillside or seafloor or cave floor, ready to rewrite the story all over again? If this is the kind of thing that keeps you up at night, you are going to want to see what we covered in this video right here. It goes even deeper into one of the strangest chapters in human evolution. Click it now.